Welcome to Books on Air. I'm Suzanne Harris. Books on Air is a series where we do a deep dive into the writer's passion. We talk to them about why they wrote the book. Sometimes we talk about what their writing process is like, but we always want to know what they want their reader to take away from their book. You will get a real glimpse behind the creative curtain, if you will. Joining me today is someone I can't wait to introduce you to. He is dynamic, he's wonderful, and I've been chatting with him far too long before we started this interview. His name is Dr. Daniel Brubaker, and he's here to talk about his book, Grief, Forgiveness, Acceptance, and Rejection. Now, Dr. Brubaker has spent half his career in academic medicine at such institutions as the University of Pittsburgh Health Science Center, Oklahoma University Health Science Center, the University of California at Los Angeles, University of California at San Francisco. He's been in the Department of Pathology, and he spent 20 years in the field of medicine, including legal and clinical medicine. Dr. Brubaker, I know I don't do your credentials justice. We don't have time to really talk about all the things you've really done that you and I talked about a few minutes ago. But what an absolute pleasure and delight it is to have you again as my guest on Books on Air. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
You know, I'm not buttering you up. I really liked this book. This book is so interesting. Why did you decide to write this book now and share it?
For a couple reasons. I think one of the first reasons I can give you is you mentioned I was doing legal medicine, which that involves medicine with personal injury, patients with work injuries, motor vehicle accidents, pedestrians getting run over, that type of thing. And I've been doing that for 24 years. These patients get involved with a lot of grief problems because of their situation. And some of them, you can't go back to work anymore, and they're grieving about not being able to earn a living and support their family, doing those kinds of things. So that was one reason why I was doing the book. The personal reason is goes back also 24 years when I had stage 4 colon cancer that I survived, and that was actually pretty easy to deal with. I wasn't really grieving over that. I know you probably, maybe your audience have heard about Elisabeth Kübler-Ross and her book on death and dying, which deals with the end stages of life and with cancer. But with me, I just motored right through it. And the thing that got me about 2 years after I survived everything was going through a divorce. And that was a pretty rough grieving process for me because it was also a child custody battle, which eventually turned out really well with my son. But at the time, it was bad. And then I was also diagnosed with glaucoma about the same time. And I had had good eyesight up until about 4 or 5 years ago. And we had talked before we got started here about some of my things that I did in the past, which was a lot of outdoor activities. I love nature. And I would, do mountain biking, backpacking. Towards the end, I could see out of my right eye 20/20 up until about 5 years ago, and then it became 20/30 and then 20/40 and now 20/50. A surgery left me blind in my left eye in 2011. So I had to stop doing those activities. Well, the other reason I had to stop is I had 6 spine surgeries in the past 12 years, so I didn't want to do any more outdoor activities. But I was doing photography, landscape photography and fly fishing with a guide that took people out fly fishing, wounded warrior type people. And with my disability, he took me out. And like I said, I could see up until about 5-6 years ago. And then I thought, what am I going to do now? I can't do any of these activities. I started getting a little depressed about everything. And I thought, well, I published in medical journals in the past and in medical textbooks. Why don't I start writing? And so I started writing started off with a political book, and now I did this grief and forgiveness book. And I've been going through a lot of grief with my eyesight over the past 5 years. So that's pretty much why I wrote the book. So it has some of my personal thinking into it, but it's not about me. The book is not about me. It's an educational book. It's about helping other people, which is what I do in medicine, and it's what I want to do for other people out there.
Well, not only that, but it's fascinating. Kübler-Ross did the Kübler-Ross model with the 5 stages of grief, and you have added on to that. And what I really liked and enjoyed about the book is the way that you explain things in terms of medical terms, but at the same time, I'm a layperson. If it's too medical over my head, then I won't really understand it and won't get anything out of it. Your book is not that way. You explain it in medical terms. For example, you start talking in the first chapter, you talk about crying. And the first thing you said was, we are the only animals to cry. And I sat there and I thought, what? Really? We're the only animals to cry? I mean, that made me start thinking. And I thought, well, wait a minute. Don't the higher primates cry? And so you hooked me right away. And I began to read, about the different kinds of tears. And it was fascinating. You will reach out and get hold of the reader, and you pull them right into your book, and they won't be able to stop reading. It's so well done and so interesting. I have no reason to say that to you other than I want you to know how much I like your book.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Let's talk about the chapters, because the chapters are very interesting. The first one, as I just said, is about crying. What else besides what I just said is in that chapter that is, what are 2 things that you think someone would want to know that's interesting? Because we cry. I find myself, I cry with sad movies, things like that. Why does that happen?
Well, crying is involved with a lot of emotions. It's involved with fear, anger, anxiety, depression, sadness, even happiness. You can see, you've seen, I have this in the book, where I was watching, when I could see, 2020, I was watching this show at the Kennedy Center with Garth Brooks, and they were, acknowledging his music and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And the TV camera came on to his face, and there were tears running down his eyes, around his face. And I thought to myself, I can see this as an emotion of relief, of happiness, just a lot of emotion involved with his life. And with crying, it allows your parasympathetic nervous system, which is a calming system in your body, to just relax and calm down and feel good. And so it's been there for us as human beings to allow for that, because when we go through things like fear, we go through a lot of pain and hardship. And when we start crying, it gets rid of that. So I introduced that because I thought it was probably a good start for all the other emotions that I was going to get into. And for example, my wife says I cry sometimes just out of the blue because of my eyesight, and she tells me, "Don't cry. I don't want to see you cry." But I put in the book, you should cry, and if people tell you don't cry, just brush that away a little bit, tell them to leave, and let you cry, because it's so important.
I agree. I couldn't agree more, and you're absolutely right. There's a range of emotions, and sometimes you're surprised when you cry. I think that's really interesting. That leads into chapter 2, which is about grief, and grief is a huge topic, and I really like the way that you broke it down and that you talked about it, especially the primary and secondary. I mean, I'd never thought about it in those kinds of terms. Let's give the listeners a little overview of grief.
So, Kübler-Ross wrote the book about grief, and she had the 5 stages. Now, if you read her book on death and dying, she has the 5 chapters, and she starts out with denial, and then she goes through the next stage, which is anger, and then bargaining, and then depression, and then finally acceptance. So we look at that as stages, but I don't look at it that way. I look at it as emotions, and so you may not go in that order, and probably 9 chances out of 10 you won't. And I can tell you, when I had cancer, I was in denial about even having cancer, and then when I had it, I said, I'm going to move on. And I went back to work. I went mountain biking. I did everything just like normal. So I passed up all of those stages and went to what I call moving on, move on with your life. So the primary and the secondary is what I would say. The primary is your own issues that you're dealing with, and the secondary is like if somebody dies, you're dealing with the grief regarding that, what happened with that other person. So it's secondary. It's outside of your own grieving process. And then I also break it down into mild, moderate, and severe emotions. And by doing that, the mild ones you can kind of take care of yourself, but when it gets into really severe ones, which is what Kübler-Ross was describing, then it sometimes gets into needing help. And I also promote that. I think doing therapy is very helpful for people.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's kind of how I dealt with the grief chapter.
One of the things that I thought was very useful and insightful was talking about the role of mindfulness in all of this. I think that's so important for people to think about and to understand what mindfulness really means. Sometimes when you say something like that, they think, oh, that's just yoga, and that's just, mumbo jumbo. I don't know what that is. I don't know how to do that. But it's not that way at all. It's really something that's very helpful, and it just gets you to sort of pull into yourself and pay attention. Is that a fair way to say it?
Oh, yes, exactly. And I wanted to also mention that the other thing that I do is I've gone through all the different religions and the cultures in terms of crying, grieving, and forgiveness, because I want the reader to see what goes on with other various religions. And so mindfulness is really good comes up with Buddhism. That's one of their primary things that they deal with because they really want to get away from suffering. They want you to get, achieve nirvana, and suffering's a big deal with them. So I also bring up all these various things educationally, so people can understand various cultures and various religions as to what transpires.
I think that's really interesting and important because everyone is going through these same kinds of things, but we all do it differently based on who we are, what our cultural beliefs are, what our religious beliefs are. And so I think giving an overview of that and addressing that and saying, okay, this is out here, but somebody else deals with this same emotion in a slightly different way. I thought that was really, really valuable. And forgiveness, I thought, was very interesting because I think when we think about the word forgiveness, we tend to think, well, somebody did something wrong to us and we need to forgive them. But this is much broader than that.
It is. And, the reason I brought in forgiveness is because it's very similar to grieving. The emotions are almost the same. And and in the grieving process, like I said, these stages were brought up, but I look at it in terms of emotions. So things like anxiety come up with grieving, and forgiveness. That all comes up in the grieving process. And I wanted to cover grieving not at the end stage of our lives like Kübler-Ross did. And by the way, David Kessler has been working with Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, and he's an expert on grief as well. And he has his own website and helps people through end stage grieving processes. But I wanted to cover all the types of grieving, from divorce to being rejected as a child, everything that we deal with in life. So that was more or less the purpose of my book.
I really hadn't thought about all of that, and that's one of the things that, for me, as I was reading through the book, you change. I think what I'm trying to say is that you have modernized the approach, and you have civilized and boiled down the approach so that as someone reads through it, they wouldn't necessarily connect all of these different pieces that you have put together in this book for us. And so as you read through it, all of a sudden you begin to look at things slightly differently, because all of a sudden you realize that when you're talking about forgiveness, it's not just this, or this. It's a much broader topic. It's a much broader thing that's in all of our lives. And it's something that I think people will have a different level of understanding once they read the book. Is that what your intention was?
Well, sort of.
Sort of, okay.
I went on. I started with the crying and the grieving because part of that was my own issue, and I see it in patients. And then I was going through a process with a forgiveness issue, which was very personal, and so I kind of moved into that, and I thought, wow, this is part of the grieving process as well. So I started researching it and writing about that, and then that kind of led me into acceptance and rejection. And the rejection part is what I thought, okay, this is kind of what's causing people to grieve and also get into the process of forgiveness. So I went into social acceptance and social rejection, and I kind of looked at it from the circle of life type of perspective.
This is a very personal book for you, and I'm sitting here wondering, often when authors write books that are very personal, And you have exposed a great many things about yourself that I think it takes someone who's very courageous to talk about the kinds of things that you're talking about with me today and that you have mentioned in the book. It sounds like as you would go through something that all of a sudden connections would be made that perhaps had not been there before. I just am hearing those things in the words that you're saying to me right now during the interview.
Well, I think what I've learned is about myself in terms of this, going back and looking at it. I started out 5 years ago writing about politics and about what I was seeing happening with the Republican Party and all the negativity that was going on and all the hatred. And then I come up with this book on grief, and now the country is going through a grieving process, partially with what took place with the election. At least that's what I hear from various people. So I kind of look back and think, is this something related to my own personal issues with God and giving me some kind of, future process of what's happening in the world? That's kind of how I've been thinking about, why did I write this and then this? Why is it all coming true?
Mm-hmm.
And we're having all this global warming, and I dedicate the book to victims of global warming and to wounded warriors, that type of thing. So I think it kind of fits with what I do medically and how I think about God and religion and philosophy and all that.
Good answer. I'm not trying to give you a tough question, I promise. But I really thought, as I read Chapter 7, is talking about the big word I think that you've already mentioned, and hate. I mean, oh my gosh. Sometimes I just become overwhelmed. I can't watch the news. Every other story is about some kid that's brought a gun to school, or somebody that story about the head of the United Healthcare that was just assassinated, shot by some guy in New York just now. I mean, you can't read the newspaper, or you can't watch television, or you can't access really any media without the onslaught, and it's an onslaught for me, of hate. I've stopped watching. I can't watch the national news. I just can't hear any more about all the terrible things that are happening out there. And when I saw your chapter on hate, I thought, you have got your finger right on the pulse of how the world feels to me right now. It just seems like it's inundated with hate.
And that produces grief.
Yes. And we feel loss. We feel so much loss.
Exactly. And that loss is part of the grieving process. And it's part of forgiveness. So, yeah, it all comes back to the circle of life as far as my way of thinking is.
Me too. I think that's one of the reasons that I liked the book, loved the book so much, is because I felt like you really are saying the words that many people need to hear. You're giving people a strategy that they can understand and actually understand what's going on and that they can utilize. And I just thought it was literally, you have your finger right on the pulse of the world right now, which is kind of an enormous thing to say, but that's exactly the way it felt to me. So thank you for this book. I think it's wonderful.
Thank you.
I'm sure that our audience is wondering where they can get it, because I confess I have been raving about you now for 20 minutes, and I'm not sorry at all. It's, of course, available on Amazon, and let me give some specific titles and a little bit of spelling of your last name so that they can find you. The title of the book is Grief, Forgiveness, Acceptance, and Rejection by Dr. Daniel, Daniel, Brubaker, Brubaker. And it's just right there on Amazon. Just put in your search feature, click it on, there you go. Is there somewhere else? Sometimes people don't want to buy from Amazon, or they're looking for a different bookseller. Is there somewhere else that they can get hold of the book?
It's on Barnes & Noble and Archway. It's on their website, and it's on my own website, which is drdanielbrubakerauthor.com. I know that's a lot for a website, but it's my full name, author, and .com, so it's easy to remember. And there's a bunch of videos and interviews and, things that are going on that I have in that website. And I'm doing a couple podcasts next week, and book signing locally in Fresno, California. So I'm trying to get it around so I can help people.
When they go to your website, what all will they find there? I know they'll find the book. Will they find a bio?
Yeah, I think there's a bio there as well. I haven't looked at it. Of course, I can't see it, but I haven't had anybody review it for me in a little while now. But, yeah, I think there's probably a bio there.
Now, I love it that you're doing TikTok. Tell me about the TikTok stuff that you're doing.
Oh, my assistant, and I call her my surrogate daughter because she's so young, but she's gotten her nursing degree now. She works with me in the office, and she does some production work with the TikTok, and she helps me with emails and a whole bunch of things. So I'm on TikTok. I did a whole lot of political stuff up until the election, and now I'm doing things on this book right now. And the purpose for the site is not just for authors or what I've been writing, but I'm also doing some medical things. I did a whole thing on vaccinations, and I'm also doing things on philosophy and religion, and as well as politics here and there. But I'm trying to get away from the politics right now and get into other things.
Tell me about what you did with Logan Crawford.
Well, I did an interview with him, and it was really good. I learned something from him as well. He loved the book as well, and he asked me about why I wrote the book, and I talked to him about my glaucoma and how we discovered that. And I had a detached retina in my right eye, and I noticed it at work, and I immediately went to an ophthalmologist to get it taken care of, and that's when they discovered the glaucoma. And he said he had the same thing happen to him. He had a detached retina, and he went through a process of kind of grieving about the whole issue. So it was a nice interaction, just like we're having today with you. And I think it's on YouTube with his name and possibly mine as well. I don't do YouTube, so I don't. I think you can just go to his name and probably get to it.
Well, you're doing so many things, and I want to thank you for taking time to be my guest here on Books on Air. But I want to ask you one final thing. When our listeners become readers and they get their own copy of Grief, Forgiveness, Acceptance, and Rejection, And they sit down. Now, this is not a book that you read through like a romance novel. You don't just sit down and read. You'll sit down and you'll read the book and you'll think. And you'll pick it up again and you'll read some more and you'll think. So this is a book that will take you some time to read. And this is also a book that you will want to keep. So even if they're going to keep the book, they will read the book from cover to cover. And finally, they will read that last page. And when they read that last page, they close the back cover, whether it's electronically turning off the machine or actually physically closing the back cover of the book. What do you, as the author of this book, what 3 things do you really want the reader, when they close that back cover of the book, to have taken away from the book?
So I want them to have knowledge. It is educational. I want them to gain knowledge about this whole process. And I have an adage in which I say, you can't change anything in which you don't have any knowledge about or you don't know. You can't cope if you don't know what things are happening in your life, in your mind. And I do some things on neurobiology in the book. I know that can be a little bit advanced, but I try to bring it down to a level for people to understand. And I want them to learn that how their brain works so that they understand what they're going through at the time that they're experiencing hurt, harm, anxiety, depression, or whatever. And I want them to bracket areas in the book that is of benefit to them so that they can come back to it and keep reading it over and over to help them become better through the whole process of grieving. And I have things in there as well as in terms of where they can get help if it gets to a point where they can't handle it themselves. So actually those are 4 things, but
I'm not counting and I don't care. Go ahead.
But I want them to take this away from the book and hopefully it will help them through all these emotional processes.
You know, you are so inspirational. I love talking to you. That's obvious. We've been on the phone together, talking together way too long, but this has just been delightful, informational, interesting. I could talk to you for another hour if we had time. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for writing the book and for being my guest. It's just been my pleasure.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you too.
We have a mutual admiration society, Dr. Brubaker.
Okay.
You've been listening to Books on Air, brought to you on the webtalkradio.net platform. You can also hear this podcast on Apple, iHeartRadio, and Stitcher. Now remember, keep reading, keep writing, and keep telling your stories. It's so important. And thank you so much for listening.